Welcome to IB Unplugged, a Cognity podcast for IBDP educators that tackles your submitted challenges and questions by connecting you with experts and peers who share their ideas and stories from real classrooms. Whether you're a seasoned educator or new to the IB world, each biweekly episode and guest aims to equip you with practical tips and positive inspiration, helping you teach with more confidence, creativity, and joy. So whether you're walking your dog or commuting to school, hit play and join a community of educators ready to learn, laugh, and thrive in your IB journey. Hello and welcome to another episode of IB Unplugged. I'm John Patton.
And I'm Courtney Marlene.
And in this episode, we got to speak with Clara Hawking, who was talking a lot about AI governance and specifically use of AI in schools, a hot topic amongst many of our users who submitted questions with regard to how do we navigate this new landscape with students and teachers having access to AI, and how do we make sure that we're using that both ethically, effectively, and safe.
Yeah, and Clara is a fantastic person to have this conversation with. She's someone I've had the pleasure of working with for years. A little background on her: she's the executive director of Compass Education, specializing in AI governance, tech compliance, and education. Formerly, she was the head of AI for a global school group with over 70 schools, and she is a recognized leader in AI ethics, policy, and responsible innovation. With a deep background in computer science, AI ethics pedagogy, and educational leadership, Clara advises schools, policymakers, and edtech companies on the ethical and effective use of AI. She's passionate about technology, learning, and human rights. She's a sought-after speaker and award-winning advocate for safe AI that enhances, not replicates, education.
Yeah, I think, and for me in the conversation, that was so evident. That's what really kind of came out, is this idea that whatever you choose to use, whatever tools, it's got to come back to enhancing the learning, making sure that it's making learning better. So not just using AI because it exists and we need to do this because it's going to be out there for our students later on, but more from the standpoint of this, it can improve education. And so really, for educators, whether you're, teaching right away, or if you're on your policy development team at the school, there's a whole lot in this episode with regard to developing policy and why that policy is so important for creating good learning conditions so that students can actually grow quite a bit. And so for me, that was a big takeaway that I really appreciated about talking with her.
Yeah, I agree. I also love this idea where it's not policy versus innovation. That's really something that she was trying to have come through, is we want you to innovate, we want you to experiment, and we want to celebrate and not diminish the enthusiasm of the teachers who want to go ahead and use these AI tools, especially if they're really thinking critically about how it can improve education. But how do we also make sure that this is safe? How do we make sure that we're doing this in a way that above all else is protecting student safety? So I think that that's something that was a really interesting part of the conversation for me, especially on the edtech side. Also, what kind of questions should you be asking to your edtech vendors? What kind of questions are parents going to be asking you about the edtech vendors? And really just, how to build your confidence and how to make sure that your school is ready to handle that kind of situation.
Yeah. So get ready for a great episode. Welcome to the show. And let's talk with Clara Hawking.
Hi, Clara. Welcome. Welcome. We're so glad to have you here on this episode for IB Unplugged.
Thank you so much, Courtney and John. It's great to be here. I look forward to having a nice chat with you guys about all the exciting things that are going on in the world of AI.
Yes, us too. We've really been looking forward to this episode. We have a lot of great questions we want to get to. And in the beginning, we'd like to just do some warm-up questions before we dive right in. So the first question that we like to ask is, why education? And I think this one's a really interesting one for you, Clara, because this was not your first path, your first job that you've done. So it's definitely been a shift for you in career.
Yeah, exactly. My career I started my life backwards, I suppose I should say, because I finished eighth grade and third grade. And back then there weren't really any alternatives after that. So I more or less sat around. I spent those years to calculate how quickly I could get through high school, attending the minimum amount of possible and doing the minimum amount of work, because I had discovered this very nice relationship between working hard and money. The harder you work, the more you get. And I thought that was significantly more interesting than school. So I went straight out into the work life, and I did the sort of old-fashioned American dream, worked myself from the mailroom literally up to advanced positions in the corporate America. And then after some years, I decided I was working too many hours and life was too boring. And I got into the yacht industry, managing mega yachts.
As most teachers start with.
Yeah, we will talk more about this. But while I was working in that industry, I really missed access to learning, which on land, you have easy access to libraries, which I was a frequent visitor of. But so I started buying tons and tons of books to take with me wherever I was traveling. And an old longing for education really started to grow. So I decided to start my college education. And once I started, I realized how easy it was for me. And I just raced through and got this enormous hunger. And then I realized that there was some kind of a disconnect at university level between the high school students that were coming in, the abilities that they had and the expectations of the professors. And at the time I was teaching at university, which prompted me to sort of switch into secondary education and find out what's happening there. Why are they not ready for these more complex critical thinking skills and more abstract ideas? And I just fell in love with education. So I have stayed in some form within the education form since, and I know that this is the calling for me. I have since then studied, have become a computer science, specializing in IT architecture first, becoming an IT architect, and then specializing in AI, where I quickly realized that my passion area was AI governance, AI ethics, and how these technologies are impacting our social communities, and none are more impacted than our children. And so, so I just am in love with education. I think it's wonderful, and that's why.
Yeah. Well, and I think that idea of like AI governance and its effects on children is like exactly what we want to get into here. But it also, any educator right now is kind of thinking like, what's going on? Like what's going to happen in these coming years? So another warm-up question we like to ask all of our guests is, what's the landscape of education going to be looking like in the next 10 years?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it is it's I think frustrating in many ways for educators to try and listen to the narratives that are taking place from big tech books that are coming out, to what's actually happening on the ground in the classroom. And then also knowing that innovation always sort of races ahead and regulation kind of follows behind. And then somewhere 10 years after that is educational reform. So teachers are definitely feeling a bit lost in this. One thing I will say is that teachers should not be expected to be replaced by AI, not anytime soon, certainly not this decade, and probably not the next. But they should be expecting that these technologies are going to start augmenting their workplace. Some of these technologies will be used in their daily work, just like they're using Google search or certain kinds of educational technology with very simple forms of AI. More advanced forms of AI will make an appearance in their workspace on a more standardized regular level. I think also the role of the teacher will shift. It has slowly shifted from where the teacher was more of the sort of conveyor of knowledge, the person in the front room who was telling students some issues and concepts around knowledge. But students today can much quicker and prefer to find that knowledge themselves. And so the teacher really needs to be the person who helps them, guide them through this knowledge to develop their AI literacy skills, critical thinking skills, and also the decision making, how to make decision making in a world of enormous stimulation. And then I think finally we will see that for our secondary students, we are going to see more personalized trends in two parts, both because the students are wanting to more individualize their learning experience, but also because technology makes it possible for students to have a more personalized experience. And so teachers need to find their way in that. And the teaching methods and strategies for how to do that well are only just starting to be thought about now. They haven't really been developed, but I think we will see this in the coming decade.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you're talking about there with regard to like the fundamental skills that we're really trying to develop, that sort of like literacy and decision-making skills and literacy as it expands into AI. I mean, it seems like, this is becoming essentially a fundamental skill that we need to integrate more fully into our classrooms. As educators that are practicing, we've got to be looking at how we can work with this, be more like the guide on the side and that sort of thing. So, in your opinion, what are kind of the fundamental skills when we talk about AI in education? What are like those fundamental skills that teachers and students definitely need to develop?
Yeah, I think one of the most fundamental skills is what's referred to by some as AI literacy. But I think the concept of AI literacy means a little bit of different things depending on who you ask. For some, AI literacy means being able to use these systems in a way that improves educational goals. But in AI governance, AI literacy means also understanding both what the AI can and what it cannot do, and then the real world impacts that it has. So being able to critically evaluate the AI's outputs, anything from spotting bias, questioning information, the ability to identify misinformation, hallucinations that might occur because a large language model is making some kind of error, and understanding how to manage those situations when they happen. And I think also safe, ethical use of AI. So that includes not just understanding whether you have said, yes, you can use my data, but really understanding what it is that you're saying yes to. Informed consent when it comes to privacy, informed consent when it comes to transparency in terms of the teacher's use of AI, of the student's work. And then I think academic integrity, very important. How do you navigate that space with all of these new technologies, and how do you use the AI effectively to truly learn more and not just skip through assignments? And then finally, we could call it responsible digital citizenship, understanding how to be a good citizen in the digital space, which is a very challenging task, but skills can be learned around digital citizenships as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we've got a big job ahead of us, is what you're telling me right now.
We do.
You've been going into schools and working with schools on this, right? That's been a fundamental part of your consulting now, correct?
Absolutely. I've been to, just in the last year, been to more than 100 schools. So I travel a lot. And I like it there. Although there's many opportunities for online and digital training and learning, being in the space, you're foot on the ground, and you have the students, you have the parents, you have the teachers, and the senior leadership sort of right in your face saying, these are my needs, and how do we do this? And often I experience in that space that the needs in the schools is a different conversation that what you're hearing from big tech when they're predicting the future. So there is a disconnect there, and I find it very important to be out there and really support our schools in figuring out how do we make this shift? What is it that we should focus on now in order for us to turn this enormous container ship in the right direction? And it's a big challenge for everyone. And there's both excitement and anxiety about it in different schools.
Yeah, something that I think I've noticed at Cognity is we're starting to definitely be getting a lot more questions. People being like, well, what are you doing with AI? And it's interesting because we're really at that phase of learning which questions we're even supposed to ask, yet alone which ones to answer. Like schools aren't really sure what they're supposed to know or what they're supposed to be worried about or be concerned about, but they're just like, AI, let's talk about it. And so, I mean, when you're going into all of these schools, what's the Swedish expression, like the red thread? Like, what are you seeing kind of consistently coming up?
I think two things that consistently come up are the 10% on each end, 10% of staff that are incredibly excited and they want to experiment and they want to go all in and they are ready for, cyborg teachers, robots, they're all in. And then we have 10% on the other end that are sincerely afraid. They are worried, they're concerned, and not just concerned for their ability to learn all of these new things, but really concerned for whether it's even a good idea. And so there is also a push against, like, can we still be teachers and not use tech? And so we have these hard conversations, and they go to the bone because everybody has to find their own way and how they want to use these technologies. But in the big red thread, 80% in the middle, are some very sort of common things. One of them is about work, like the role of the teacher. What skills do I need to learn in order to still do a good job for my students and still have a good work-life balance? And how do I fit that in to a schedule that's already incredibly packed? I am so busy. How am I going to learn this? Do I need to be a computer scientist? Right. And then another big question is really about what makes sense in the classroom in terms of the use of technology. If we bring this in, does it make education better? And I think that's a critical question that we are missing sometimes when I'm just with the tech conferences and the techie people. That very fundamental question is often missing. But teachers are always going into that. You don't bring a piece of technology into the classroom just to entertain the students and have fun. You bring it in because you believe that piece of technology can substantially create a better learning experience for those students, and because you know that it's safe. And so what's coming up now with generative AI that hasn't come up much in the last 20 years with different types of educational technology has been, wait, is this safe? Is it okay for me to make an account for a student? Because I don't really understand how this is different. So they are starting to ask those questions. As you say, Cognity is getting those questions. And I believe that we will see this more and more in the years to come, that the communication, the dialogue between edtech vendors and schools will need to increase. It will need to be more effective, informative, and transparent. Because certainly in the EU, we can maybe talk about that a little bit, but certainly in the EU AI Act requires that the users in the schools are understanding the technology that they are using, and they are in fact AI literate. It's a mandate, and so I think those questions where before you could take a piece of technology like Cognity or some other piece of technology and just use it and feel safe in doing that. Teachers are starting to wonder, is it safe? We just need to know, and I think that is a trend of the times indeed. Yeah.
This episode's Cog Tip comes from Anu Coco in Birkerød Gymnasium. She says, I like the IA guidance and will give it to my students to read and to be able to check that they have read it. It is a good starting point for the IA process. In addition, I love that there are good inspirational embedded YouTube videos that help me in finding inspiration for the topic to investigate further with my students. I mean, there's some fundamental things like when it comes to using different platforms where obviously they have like age limits and that sort of stuff, that kind of their specific policies for how students can or people can interact with that. And I notice, as a practicing educator, we see this with our students as well, where suddenly they're using some form of tech where already you're just in the back of your head, you're like, well, you're not old enough actually to be using that tech. So it lends itself to the policy development and the implementation of that policy, the practices that come with it. So I guess, you just mentioned you're seeing over 100 schools a year. Are there any schools where you see they're really doing it quite well? Like this school's kind of got it going on. They've got their AI governance well, their policy into practice is working well, and you see it enacting with the students and the teachers quite well.
That's a super question, because we're always looking for good cases. And I think in many schools, it is a work in progress for many schools. But I have seen a set of schools in Morocco. It was a set of French and English bilingual, and one of them was trilingual private schools in Morocco. And they took a decision almost a decade ago to put in their senior leadership position a digital coordinator for the teachers. So this person's role in the senior leadership team is to work with the teachers on identifying technology that could be useful, and then how to use it well for their particular subject. And so they have many different types of technology, and they go through a series of activities before deciding on a technology, including filming lessons, measuring the outcomes, doing little pilots, and then they scale it out. And it's a safe feedback form for the teachers and the learning coordinator. And that person's sole job is to work on methodologies and technology. And that has been amazing to see. When I've gone to these schools, I'm just blown away with how smartly the technology is used, and also how considered. There's lots of analog learning where the kids are sitting and doing other things without any technology at all. They do a lot of stations where they rotate students in and out of different learning environments, including technology. But they are they're very clear on their understanding of why that technology is there. And I think that's a good case for us, because the parents that are coming up now, our youngest millennium parents and our oldest Gen Z parents, they have grown up with technology as opposed to the Gen Xers. And so they have learned the hard way what works and doesn't work. And they will be asking much more critical questions, including, why are you using this technology with my kid? And so I think having someone there that really works with teachers on developing methodology is a fantastic case. It's not in the budget for everyone. But that's an example that comes to mind.
Yeah, I think that's great, because I think there's also, I personally, I see such a difference in teachers who feel confident in using the tool. And I'd imagine if they have that person, like you said, that feedback loop, just somebody to bounce the ideas back, like, let me make sure I understand this. And that way, it's very scary to go up to a group of teenagers and start using a tool that you're not fully comfortable with. And it can derail you so quickly as a teacher if you start hesitating and being like, "Ooh, actually, I don't know what I'm doing with this thing." And so you're going to be more resistant to trying something new if you're not confident in using it. And so, I mean, I've done a lot of teacher training, and that's always one of the biggest things that I want to make sure that we achieve is this confidence level. But I guess it's not just confidence in utility and using the tool, but also in why you're using it, and what are the impacts of the students, like it's really taking it to a much deeper level of not just, I know how to use this program, but I know why I'm using it, the potential outcomes, the ethics component, like you were saying, like that now these kind of dialogues also need to be happening with your classes.
And I guess that's probably part of the reason that there's almost like a delay, as you were commenting earlier, Clara, of this we kind of innovate really quickly, and then we figure out how to enact that, and then behind that comes the policy, and then behind that comes the practice of it, right? It's like the development comes a little bit behind what's going on there. But I mean, obviously, as you're talking about AI governance, in the back of my head, I work as part of our senior leadership team at the school. I'm constantly thinking, okay, how does this inform our policies? And the obvious one for most schools is, academic integrity, but it extends beyond that. And the actual policy itself, like an AI policy, how do we actually do things at our school itself? I wonder if you could comment with regard to AI governance and schools and education and young people, why are those policies so important, and how, what are ways that teachers can kind of easily get involved in that in a way that doesn't feel intimidating, but they can actually move forward with it?
Yeah, I love policies, but I love live policies. I love them as live documents. And maybe
I just heard every teacher be like, "Oh, I love policies too."
But do. I think I love clear instructions on what we can and cannot do, and I love them when they are live policies, when they're hands in the pudding. That we are constantly working with those policies. I go sometimes on school websites and look up some of their policies, and they were last signed in 2013. And I think,
Right.
okay, so it has no meaning. And when it comes to AI, there's so much. It's such a difficult terrain to navigate for any person that it is not realistic to expect them to be able to take all of their own decisions on what they should do in XYZ situation. And their policies are really a tool to help them feel safe in making decisions around the use of technology in the classroom. And that is also a tool for them to build trust with their most important stakeholders, the children, the students, the families, both in primary, secondary education, but really extending into universities. We won't have a relationship or even very many people enrolled in our schools if we don't have a trust relationship. Once that trust breaks down, everything else falls. Parents certainly need to know that when they send your child to you, they're going into a safe space. And policies around AI can really help both the communication on safety, but also on everybody understanding exactly why it is that we are doing the things we're doing. Moreover, of course, for schools, policies are helping schools align themselves with law. Data protection law, privacy laws, transparency laws, and laws coming up in AI, not just in the European Union, but we're seeing AI law, many of them risk-based laws, developing in many regions of the world. Policy also, I think, and this is one of my favorite about policies, they really help vet vendors. There's a lot of very sparkly, very fancy technology in the educational marketplace. I was just at an EdTech conference, and I think there were 170 new startups, and all of them had AI inside. And I thought, good policy will help schools figure that out as well, because it will help schools really figure out how to ask the right questions from their vendors and make sure that they are using school approved accounts and not their personal accounts, which is there's a lot of risk and liability around establishing personal accounts. And then policies also help with training. They help schools identify exactly what needs are in terms of training students and the staff in being responsible in their AI use. So I think a policy is one of the most fundamental concepts to get in place well as a school begins to ready themselves for building an AI governance framework.
So much of what you're talking about seems to be like it's effectively safeguarding, right? We're really looking after young people. We're looking after the people in our school. So of course we're mission driven and we're trying to abide by the laws of wherever we might be located. But it seems like so much of this is actually just like protecting young people as they engage in this wider world. And again, like become citizens of a digital space, not only of the physical space. And so I guess in that respect, like to what extent do you see this as like a standalone kind of policy development, or is this more of this is basically safeguarding, or is there more than that?
Yeah, a good question. You'll be amazed at how many vendors I have spoken to where I ask them, tell me how safety is built into your design. Tell me about, imagine I'm a parent and tell me about the safety. Go into details. And they struggle with this question because a lot of EdTech is not built starting with safety and design. And so, yes, essentially a good AI policy is safeguarding because that must be the number one reason why we go to work every day, is that the people that are put in our charge are safe. And then the second, that they are thriving in that safe space. And third, that they are learning. But if we can't keep them safe, then we're missing the mark. And I certainly think very highly of safety. I start and end my day with it. and but I think also very highly of innovation. And I actually believe that safeguarding when it comes to technology will lead us to better innovation, because there's plenty of technology out there that should have never been in schools to begin with. And this will allow for schools to make informed decisions and get some of that technology out of the schools as well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, people were using edtech solutions before AI came out, and there were a lot of really important questions that we would be asked about the technology that we're providing, things like that in the safeguarding space. But is there anything that you think has become kind of increasingly important to be asking when you are evaluating these AI tools in the school that maybe didn't come up as much beforehand?
Yeah, I think there are issues that we see in a different way. So, of course, there have been privacy laws in the US. There's the COPPA regulations. In Europe, you have the GDPR, and vendors mostly have been able to deal with that very easily. What's different in the regulation that's coming is that people have to make informed decisions on the use. And we are seeing that there are important concerns already taking place. So, for example, we see a lot of edtech companies that have embedded some kind of a large language model wrapper into their tool. So they have a little chatbot or something like that is driven by a large language model. But at the end of the day, we really don't have a good understanding of how the data in that chatbot is exactly used. We don't exactly know what servers that information is going to. And we keep in mind here, when we're talking schools, primary, secondary, we're talking children. So these are children's unique data that are being sent off to we don't know where. There's also a lot of unnecessary data collection. And so we need to know that the vendor is not collecting data that is absolutely anything other than what's absolutely necessary for the technology to work well, but that there's not anything unnecessary data coming up. So that could be something like an edtech that is tracking the mouse clicks of a student to track how engaged they are in X, Y, Z task. That seems probably at first like a good idea, but it seems like an unnecessary data collection, and it's also potentially a breach of certain regulations. So we need to be better at sort of asking those types of questions, because it is students' information that is being sent out. And then, of course, we also know that a lot of the generative AI has some errors and some biases. It has a preference for the male prototype. It has more data that is produced by young males. It has algorithms that have trained the AI that's primarily trained by male employees. We are missing data from 2/3 of the global population. There's 1 billion people that still don't even have electricity, much less are hooked up to the internet producing data. We know that there are risks around language. For example, the American large language models process in American English, not in British English or any other language. So even if I asked a question in, say, French, the model would then translate the French into American English, process the information, produce a response, translate it back to French, and push it out to me. So I'm getting this sort of American biases in my responses, which is why students that are using a large language model in French often feel that they are disconnected from the system. And these are real risks, because this comes down to an equitable issue. Are the students getting equitable access in their education? And we know that with some forms of AI, they are not. So we do have to address that as real risks.
Yeah, well, if you think about like the IB mission itself and ways in which the IB is really trying to push things out for the diploma program, you want to develop people who have intercultural understanding and respect. And when you see that widening of the gap, it's kind of like the a preference for certain models of education and almost a like removing of indigenous styles of education, for example. And so, as you were talking there, I was thinking quite a bit about theory of knowledge. I was thinking quite a bit about like developing critical thinking skills, and really essentially just questioning, is this worth time or not? Like, how do I know if I can actually trust this? Where's the value in this particular platform? And I guess, does that lend itself to school-approved AI tools and AI accounts? Does that kind of help the process, or is it like exacerbate it even more because you're getting like this narrowed window view of what you're looking at?
Yeah, I think the importance about school-approved accounts is that schools can, maybe as part of their AI policy, set up a sandbox for the 10% of the super innovative one experiment, teachers, where they can, in a safe space, test out some of these tools before they use them for the whole school. And it will probably always be the case that in a school environment, students will not have access to the super newest model that have just come out, and nor should they, because we need to make sure that the technology that we bring in has educational value, that it's safe, and we can't figure that out on a whim. So of course, there's lots to be excited about, but it's really important that the school goes through the process of identifying a vendor that meets the standards of the school and the value of the school. I think the IB, of course, is a great example. As I said, I have a soft spot for IB, but I actually believe that the IB Learner profile is a really good profile to develop in a time where you live with very advanced technologies that are coming in very quickly. I mean, we're talking generative AI now, but in 10 years we'll be talking quantum computing, and it's a whole different conversation. But still, the IB Learner profile really lends itself well, because it is about developing holistic thinking, risk-taking, abstract thinking, and engaging with other viewpoints, whether they come from a machine or another human being or another country. And I think that there is a lot of strength in that for the IB. Sure. The challenge there then is to ensure that when technology is used, that it's used in a way that aligns itself with the values, and identifying when it may not, and then how to deal with that.
Yeah. Have you seen any really powerful or really great ways that schools have been teaching, whether it's the ethics component, the academic integrity component with AI? Is there anything that you feel like has really resonated with students where they're like, okay, I get this, not like, yeah, okay, I'm just going to use ChatGPT anyway, kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think, why do students use ChatGPT for their schoolwork? Well, some use it because they think the schoolwork is a waste of time, or because they think it's boring, or because they, prioritize their time poorly, and they need to speed up the process. But I have seen teachers that are using it very well. What they have done very well is to mark out with clear instructions particular intersections where they want for the student to use generative AI. So it could be something like initial idea generation work with a generative AI. Here's what I want you to do. At that step, these are the instructions. And then the student then turn in their prompting, a history as well, to kind of show how they interacted. That allows for the teacher to give the student feedback on how they could interact more effectively with the AI as a sort of a technical skill, but it also allows for them to see where the student use their own critical thinking and overuse the technology. And then in different stages of these assignments, they then say, here you can again go in and use. Also, I've seen teachers very effectively use generative AI for feedback on drafts. AI, I know we hear in the news that it will replace grading, but it's not very good at grading, certainly not the large language models, but it's very good at giving feedback on drafts. Right. And teachers have used that very effectively, which allows for the students really to go in and address their papers much more efficiently than they were if the teacher had rushed through a draft feedback in too little time to get it done. So I think that there are some wonderful cases appearing. There's also some instructional frameworks that are starting to come out, and some empirical research that is coming out about what works, what doesn't work. There's a super interesting study that came out of Nigeria, where students did 2 years of learning in 6 weeks using advanced AI to take them through the learning process. And these were students who had no computational experience at all, and had enormous learning gains. So I think it can be used well, but it can also be used poorly. And of course, that's the rub.
Becoming a better IBDP educator is a daily practice informed through reading, research, personal experience, and episodes from IB Unplugged, like the one you are listening to right now. But sometimes the show can go a bit too quickly, or we can simply forget some of the key points once we are out of the car or back from our walk and in the office preparing for our next lesson. That's why it's easy to download the episode summary at cognity.com/IB Unplugged. Simply navigate to today's episode and click Free Summary to receive a condensed summary of today's episode, including links to other sources and other exciting bits of information you can use immediately in your daily practice. It's free and it helps. Now, back to the show. You mentioned it kind of earlier. It's like you want your 10%ers to like go and try it and innovate it and get comfy with it, but you don't necessarily want them to just immediately start using it, right? Because they need to know that this is a safe and ethical thing. You know, I mean, you spoke about providing feedback on drafts and whatnot, and that's definitely been a conversation at my school where I work in terms of like, yeah, this can be an effective way to give some positive feedback for students. They can learn very quickly. But, you know, we have a digital learning coordinator who's like, be sure you use this AI and not this one, because this one protects data and any sort of like information of school or student information, whereas this one doesn't. And I think if you've got your 10%er who's kind of running with it, who doesn't do that homework, then you may actually be causing some breaches of, you know, policy, as we were talking about before, or even, you know, creating more of a digital footprint for somebody than what they initially sort of signed on for. So there's that importance, I think, of really wrestling with it for a bit and almost like holding yourself back, even though you're like, oh, this is a great tool. Let me just kind of make sure that it's good in our context. And then the other one, I just wanted to comment on what you were mentioning before. Like we do like a traffic light system. We picked that one up. So it's kind of the red, yellow, green, and like green is like, yeah, full use of AI. That's cool. Use that to generate some ideas. And so that way red means like, don't use it. So it kind of easily sets up each assignment and you're just like, all right, this is a green light, sort of AI usage. This assignment's a red light. And then trying to pull out that critical thinking. But what I found really interesting, especially with the IB recently on their policies on academic integrity and the use of AI, is not only do students have to cite that they used AI, but they have to cite their prompt, like what you mentioned before. And that kind of brings out that critical thinking a little bit more. So when we think of it from an educator perspective, how much of this is like teaching, not just teaching use of AI, but teaching like how to ask great questions. And ultimately, that's just kind of coming back to good teaching.
Yeah, exactly. I have said sometimes over the last few years that English teachers are a valuable resource right now because they know language, and any language teacher really, but they understand how to weave sentences together, how they understand syntax, they understand all the nuances of expression, and the better you can do that, the better you can communicate with a large language model. And so those who have really good results with large language models are the ones who already have those skills. And so learning to express yourself is part of learning AI literacy, and which is why we won't see languages disappear out of our classrooms, because they are really needed more than ever. And there are actual people who have majored in language degrees that are making a significant amount of money working in the tech industry because they understand language. And I think that is an interesting dynamic, because when you hand in your prompts, it's a valuable resource for the teacher actually to see how that student communicates with a machine and then guide them to do it more effectively. I might add to that bit, of course, that there are also some advantages for students maybe who have struggled with communication before, because we're getting more and more of a conversational language with the large language models, and it actually allows a pathway for students who who may have struggled, let's say students who are in a IB English language pathway or IB Spanish pathway, who don't speak that language as their first language and are sometimes struggling with getting their points across or being part of the conversation. And because we have more of a conversation on large language models, they actually now have a better opportunity to be more of an equitable part of their school community, which I also think is a very important part for us to consider in this context as well.
Well, and a really positive use of AI as well. I mean, the number of students I've come across who, their language skills don't allow them to fully participate in the conversation or participate in the dialogue, and therefore, there's that fear of like, I am smart. I know what I'm doing. I know I can contribute to this conversation. I just can't do it in this particular language. And I think it's those students that we see very often kind of going to a large language learning model or some sort of translator that sort of helps them get that across. And yet at the same time as educators, then we've got like our antenna that's like, oh, you use this tool that you're not supposed to. And so it almost becomes like a double-edged sword for a student who's trying to grow up in that. And they're going like, I want to contribute to the conversation. I just don't have all those skills yet. So I use this thing, but now you're telling me I can't use that thing. So I think it creates a real tension there with, you want to develop these skills. You want students to be part of the conversation. You want to like bring out their best. But also, how do we do that in an ethical and safe way? And so I guess this kind of lead into that question, like how do you navigate those ethical lines of AI use, technology, skills acquisition in realistic, specifically international school settings where you've got like students from all over the place and they're not all of just one nationality learning the IB curriculum, but for example, they come from many different backgrounds, not just their families, the way they've come used to education in general, the way they perceive grades, the pressure that might come from performance, and therefore they may use these tools in a different way. How do we navigate that ethical and that sort of skill development?
Yeah, I think one of the things we've seen, for example, from the IB is the IB was very quick to come out with instructions for how to use AI ethically in IB work. What many then immediately said, okay, this sounds great, but how do we do that in practice? And the truth is,
I was one of them.
Yes. I think I might have asked that question myself at a conference a couple of years ago. But I think one of the things for us to remember is that we don't have all the answers yet because we haven't lived with this technology before. So if we sort of dial the clock back to 21 years ago when Google first came in the classroom, many of the conversations were a bit the same. How do we use this? Will it replace teachers? Will we still need a library? How do we do all these things? And over time, teachers found really good use for having something like a search engine ready in the classroom where they could go in and ask questions immediately to which they may not have had the answers. Large language models is a bit the same way.
Things like spell check and Grammarly, very like initial signs of AI that now when we talk about AI in the conversation of a large language learning model, it's like, oh, that's a completely different thing. But you also have to say, well, no, we've been using a lot of these tools for a while. Spell check, even Clippy back from Microsoft, that was still AI, right? So there's still elements of, we got used to this in the past. It's just a matter of like being adaptable and thinking about the skills we're trying to train along the way.
It is. And I think the significant difference here is that the other types of use of AI have been relatively inside of a frame. We were able to sort of say, okay, the AI do X, Y, Z, and then that's what it does. But these new large language models are more unpredictable. A lot of it is a black box. We don't really know exactly what's happening on some levels. And that I think is the big difference that now requires us for all of us to make informed decisions when we are using these technologies and for students needing really clear guidance on when is it okay for me to do it and when is it not okay. And when it's okay, how do I do those things? And I think also importantly, for teachers to say, now I don't want you to use AI, and here's why. Now you have to learn something human to human, a truly analog human skill that AI cannot replicate. And that also requires AI literacy to be able to actually make that decision and validates the need for training, I think.
Yeah. Where do you think that a school if maybe they can't get somebody to come in as a consultant, or they can't have somebody in senior leadership that can be leading the way, if you're in a school where you're maybe a bit more on your own, but you know that this is something that's important and that you want to focus, where would you start for those teachers? Like, what could they do on their own?
I would definitely start with coming together as a staff and give an input on AI policy. And I think for those sessions, I would also invite parent groups and student groups in, and start with a sort of major brainstorm to identify the unique needs of each group of people in the school. And very importantly, I think also marketing, admissions offices, the front office, they really have a very different experience of how AI is used. Really important to get schools to right away get those perspectives in, and then for the policy team to sit down and really develop a meaningful policy and get that communicated out. Aligning with efforts to identify how AI is used, because you can't really say much about how you want to use AI if you don't know how it's already used. And I think many schools will be surprised about how many educators and students have private accounts with different types of AI. And that might actually seem like a good idea at first, but in the long run, maybe could be done more effectively by the school, making sure that it's a decision that's taken together. And then there are some free resources. We need more because schools have no time and they have no money. These are always the two things. So we need resources. We need accessible resources for training. I know there are some of the big tech that have created resources. So a lot of schools, for example, have Microsoft for Education, or they have Google for Education. And both of those companies, for example, have free resources online. Whether you have a company account with them or not, you can go in and take the training there. There are other vendors that offer free resources. There are lots of webinars as well online. But I think that we will see more and more national governments not only finalizing their guidelines, but also creating resources for schools in the relevant regions and countries. Saudi Arabia comes to mind. They just finished and published an amazing instruction for the use of AI in education for Saudi Arabian schools, and they will then follow up with training for their school systems as well. And we will see this more and more. And although it feels like a very urgent need, these things do take time. It does take a little time to develop the resources. But there are free resources online, and then of course in some of the online courses that you can take as well, where there are training resources. But time is complex, and many teachers really need to know practicalities. What happens in X situation? What do I do? And so many prefer the face-to-face workshops and environments, and the need for that is enormous, absolutely enormous.
Yeah. So, as you were speaking there, it was kind of making me think about like almost the luxury of kind of having that top-down governance, like as a school, if you can lean on your countries or your, in the EU, for example, you mentioned it earlier at the top of the show here, like the EU AI Act, and sort of now like having that there kind of offers a little bit of extra governance where the school doesn't feel like we have to just be navigating this water on our own. And it was good to hear you say that, okay, that's already starting, that kind of thing is being replicated in other places. You mentioned Saudi Arabia. And so I guess I'm wondering, like for those places that don't have that sort of national governance yet, and that time might be coming soon, is the best thing that school can do just kind of looking for these free resources as you're talking about? Or is it like develop your own policies? Or is it like, what do you suppose a school should be doing if they don't have that top-down governance?
So I think there is a document that's formed to be a kind of a global guidance from UNESCO. UNESCO has an enormous resource library, including recommendations for the use of AI in education, which has a lot of really practical steps and advice, guidance that schools can take. But I think it's very important for every school to really have an AI policy. Schools have different curriculum, they have different values, they have different nationalities and languages. It's really important for the school to start with saying, what are our values? What's our mission and vision? And then how can we use AI in a way that we help grow that and sustain that for our community? And it is work, and it does require some deep digging, but I think it's work that maybe should have been done really 10 or 15 years ago when the big push for digitalization happened and everybody was buying laptops and nobody was telling teachers how to use these laptops to make education better, which is why today you often go in classrooms and what you see is 20 students in an office landscape, and you're not really sure if they're learning or if they're just surfing around on the internet. So this is an enormous opportunity for a school to say, why are we using technology? What is it we would want to use it for in order for us to meet our mission and our vision for our school, and in order for us to keep the students safe and make education better? And those are important questions to ask on a regular basis anyway. So I think it's an amazing opportunity. I think Europe, EU is lucky in the sense that we are now compelled to do it. We're mandated to do it under law. So the work will be done. But I also think it's an amazing opportunity for us to really ensure that we can say with certainty that when we're using technology, the kids are safe using it and they are learning from it, and we know why we are using it. And I think that other regions are not so fortunate when it comes to those things.
Great. I really, really appreciate this conversation. I think it's been super interesting to kind of get into some of the nitty gritty parts. I, of course, from the edtech background space, I love the idea of having these conversations because I think that from the vendor side, it should be a conversation that you're comfortable having, because you shouldn't be building anything that isn't bringing value. You should be able to stand behind. This isn't just a feature we released because it's high tech and new and shiny. It's like, what's the pedagogical reasoning behind building this, and what's the gain in the classroom? And are you, of course, always keeping your students in a safe space? So, no, I think it's a fantastic conversation that we will be continuing to have more and more this year, in the next decade, as you said. And yeah, I just am really grateful that we were able to have this conversation with you, Clara.
Yeah, Clara, you're brilliant. This was tons of fun. I really appreciate you taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
Well, thank you to both of you. I had a blast, and I love talking to edtech vendors because the whole marketplace for edtech vendors is really shifting because these questions are coming up for schools in a different way. And I think it's just super exciting for us to have more meaningful conversations about, we all want the same thing at the end of the day, hopefully. And the vendors who don't will find their way out of schools anyway. And I think it's of course fantastic just to see you, Courtney, because I don't see you enough. And it was so nice meeting you, John, and really appreciate both of you taking the time to chat with me as well. I enjoyed it immensely.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Clara. Great stuff.
The pleasure is ours. So yeah, thank you so much. And hope to talk to you again soon about this conversation and keep it going. IB Unplugged is a Cognity podcast hosted by John Patton and Courtney Marlene and produced by Catalina Gaffney. Be sure to subscribe or follow and share with your fellow IB educators. If you'd like to submit a topic, request, or question, please do so on cognity.com/IB Unplugged. Let's keep the conversation going and support each other in teaching with confidence, creativity, and joy. See you next time.